Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of this very radical feminist book, but if you were to argue against feminism, you have to understand their ideology, you have to know where they're coming from, and you gotta speak with facts that they will accept, and in order to do that, you gotta know what it is they're upon. Okay, let us begin. In this book, when I talk about men and women and what they do, I'm not talking about biological essentialism. Okay, a new term here. Biological essentialism. This book does not subscribe to any authoritarian view of gender. Look at that. Do you see what she just did here? You can always tell a leftist. Everything is authoritarian. Authoritarian view of gender. So, authoritarian always has a negative connotation of a dictator, of an oppressor, of a Stalin, of a Hitler, right? So, of a Mussolini, of a Pol Pot, you name it. So, when she says authoritarian, she wants you to think of Islam and Christianity as authoritarian in a highly negative sense because they conform to the gender binary. So she's such a radical that she wants you to think of religion as purely authoritarian, and if something is authoritarian, it must be rebelled against, must be eradicated, and people must be free to choose, right? So pay attention to the language she uses. It's very radical and political, very embedded. To any authoritarian view of gender that divides the world into immutable biological categories. Now, divides the world. So she contends religion, since it clings to the binary, is divisive in nature. So she's therefore saying that by allowing people to lie to themselves, basically, I'm being more negative in my wording here, that by allowing there to be no gender binary, that's more unifying. You see how absurd that is? So she's really stacking the cards for her to be the savior philosophy agent and for religion to be the oppressor that must be overcome. Right? Pink and blue binary unbiddable, nor does it believe in imposing political destiny on diverse human bodies. Political destiny on diverse human bodies. So here you see their flowery language. Diverse human bodies. So she's trying to get you to have the imagery of the beauty and the decadent. Right? So instead of saying, for us Muslim women, we cover up, we have our uniformity. The men have their hijab. So men and women have hijabs in Islam. We have codes of conduct that are binary. Women like this, men like that. She's focusing on the perverse, sort of like the Caligula palace agenda. Where if you're not familiar, Caligula, he was such a hedonist and such a terrible ruler of Rome. In his palace, because he was such a pervert, he had dwarves, he had amputees, mentally retarded people, he had fat, skinny, so he was indulging in every type of fetish, and he thought that the ugliness, the rejection of a beauty standard was beautiful. So what they're doing now is they're going at every mental deformity, every rejection of the religious standard is diverse and therefore better. And you should unify around the disunity of the religious standard. And it's quite intense to have such language like that. Without their consent. Again, the leftist language, they weaponize the word consent. So she's saying that it's wrong to impose a gender binary on diverse human bodies without their consent. Do you see what she's saying here? So this leftist language is going to be used to erode parents' authority, religious parental authority over their children's bodies. Because a leftist will say the child, the baby, doesn't consent to you putting blue pajamas on him. He hasn't accepted, he cannot consent and accept the gender binary you're putting on him, therefore you're being an authoritarian. Do you see how the dance is done through their rhetoric? Because when they talk in this way, it entrances its listeners and they're like, oh, trigger word of authoritarian. Oh, diverse. Like they have these really spellbinding types of language that are intelligently designed. They are trained. But that's why nerds like me and others, when you digest what they're saying, you're like, huh, and that's where philosophy really comes in. Because if you went to a more naive person, they're not as well read, they're just humble, right? They don't pay attention, and then you start talking this way, you can brainwash them pretty effectively. But to someone who's pretty discerning, pretty aware, pretty in tune with the laws of Sharia, is upon the haq, and is trained in other types of knowledge as well, it's more difficult to pull a fast one, right? And so the weaponization of the word consent is a political strategy. They don't care really about the word consent and just sexual relations, but rather, well, they do, but they don't at the same time, because if they really did, they wouldn't abuse the word. They've abused the word racism, and they've abused the word masculinity, because they call it toxic constantly, and now they're abusing the word consent. So they water it down by overusage and overlapping it upon subjects that it doesn't really fit into. Essentialism is invariably conservative. When I write about men or about women, I am including everyone who locates themselves in those categories. I identify as a genderqueer myself. Aha, so she's a genderqueer herself. So we know even more of her bias, right? You're dealing with somebody who thinks that they have the ability to be fluid in their gender, right? They have archetypes of romanticism periods of chivalry in their mind and think that by rebelling against that beautified standard, they're therefore creating their own reality where they're no longer a woman. It's almost like there's a huge separation between the physical body and the mind and the soul. Because the mind and the soul ain't the same. Their mind is rejecting their soul's connection to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because they think, I assume, by their rhetoric, you can judge them, that the soul is somehow acting in a way through the mind, and that the body is the picture frame of their consciousness, and therefore the body, the mind, and the soul don't necessarily have to be in sync. They're mirrors of each other in a way. But they don't think you could have just a male soul or a female soul, right? That your soul goes in, and then your mind is like, hey, you can rationalize to be this way or want to express in that way, and then the body is your canvas to paint upon. Whereas in Islam we know the bodies have rights over us, and I'd argue that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the body a sort of prison box. You cannot escape the biological realities, and if you do, you think you're escaping, but you have a mental problem inside due to the chemicals in the food, drugs, alcohol, a malfunction during pregnancy, or a spiritual dilemma, or brainwashing by deviants in the media. So it's a very fascinating and deep topic, but you have to know how to speak to these people, because they can confuse others if you are unable to follow what it is they're saying. Meaning that the category of woman does not fully describe my lived experience. So here she's saying, if you're genderqueer, that means that, one gender doesn't talk about your fully lived experience. You can never live an experience of a man. Impossible. You cannot fertilize a woman. But do you see how insulting the language is? For a woman to say that she can even live the life of a man degrades what it means to be a man. Just like a man in a dress, if he thinks he understands what it means to be a woman at all, he cannot, because he doesn't have the biological bonds. Think about your veins. Your veins are almost like the bars upon you. They are all over your body, right? Your soul is almost like entrapped in that. Because as long as your heart is beating, you're in the confines of your body. When the angel of death comes to take you out of that, we'll see how you express yourself before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But Allah is going to purify us within our gender binary, from what I understand. If you're a woman on earth, you're going to be a woman in paradise. That is clear. Okay? You're a male on earth, you're going to be a male in paradise. This is clear in Islam. So, any type of earthly malfunction that goes against that, Allah, I think, from what I understand, is going to cleanse you of that. Every impurity is going to be taken out of your heart, and you'll be brand spanking new in paradise. If you get in. If you get in. Otherwise, the flames will lick your heels and purify you that way. Lived experience is another posh liberal term. It's a nonsense term. Lived experience. You've only lived like a woman because you cannot escape your own biological reality. You going to work and wearing a pantsuit doesn't make you a man. Does not. A man has testicles. He's biologically ingrained. And then there's the philosophical side of what it means to be a man. A woman can never be a father. Cannot happen. A hen cannot be a rooster. A bull cannot understand what it's like to be a dairy cow. You don't have the biological assets in order to truly comprehend. You cannot meditate upon and theorize what it's like to be something other than what you are, and then say that that's rooted in reality as a lived experience. See what I'm saying? I can philosophize in my head and meditate upon what it would be like and imagine myself as a dragon. I can say I'm otherkin, like these leftists say, but I've never actually been inside the body of a dragon and been bound to its nervous system and felt what it feels like to eat as a dragon, to breathe as a dragon. So I can't really say that's my lived experience, that I've not fully lived my life as a woman, because I've imagined in my fantasies in my head what it would be like to live as a dragon. As children, we play and we fantasize about being Superman, about being a warrior, that we slayed a mighty ogre, whatever. But in the end, we must separate fantasy, idealism, and dreams and the nonsense realm from the hard, raw reality. So this person saying, a woman does not fully describe my lived experience, this is semantics. You have only lived as a woman. You paying your bills. Yes, you weren't a princess sitting on the softest cushion, having people give you manicures and pedicures and petals falling from the sky and sort of caricature of a princess, right? No. Yeah, you haven't got to live that. But a woman can never escape the reality of living as a woman, because she has a period, she has a cervix, she has the hormones of a woman. Her eyes, her ears, everything was folded and folded and folded the tissue wrapping her bones as a woman. That is the reality. You can't get eggs from a rooster. You can't get milk from a bull. The biological constraints are there and are designed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your consciousness cannot escape that. If you use drugs and you think, you have somehow clocked into another reality, you've only within the confines of your own mind. You have not escaped into anything else. Your soul cannot exit your body and possess something else. That is not something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done. Your consciousness cannot exit and then go into the mind of a man, experience what it's like to be him, and then go back into your body. That is not a power that we have. We only can know from our perspective. And being a genderqueer feminist, you will never know what it's like to live like a man, because the weight that men have on their shoulders since Adam, may Allah be pleased with him, is immensely heavy, and no amount of pomp, costume wearing is going to share in that reality. It would be better to create a new word. We cannot say that we know what it's like to live as each other. That's just not physically possible. It's not spiritually possible. It's just not possible. That's what I'd argue. But when you slow down and you dig at what these people are saying, you can perceive and pluck out the nonsense quite clearly. The language they're using of the ivory tower colleges, it's a weapon, it's an agenda, it's a plague, and you must know how to handle them. And there are multiple ways of handling it, but it's something to think about. Very interesting book thus far in terms of how it gets us to think, how we will know what type of indoctrination they're going to be pushing on your daughters in school, and how they're going to try to really get at your sons. It's very important for Muslim parents to slow down and take a gander at what it is they're paying for in the colleges and what philosophy these people are upon. If you know the philosophy, you can argue against it more effectively, because then you know what moves they're gonna do. You study your opponent so that you can help to predict what they're what they're going to do next. Through their writings, you'll know them. And so that's what we aim to do here. Very interesting. By the way, if you'd like to join my blog, it's www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive. Hope to see you there.